Hello, everyone. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order here today at 4 o'clock on time, which is great. And we will proceed with the roll call. We got a lot of stuff to cover today. That's quite important. So I will dive right in. So we've been called to order. George Savage, I'm here. Stephen Casani.
Here.
Ken Levine.
Here.
Chris Rittler is away. He's absent today. Michelle Takai.
Here.
Bill Urban.
Here.
Mark Waser.
Here.
All right. So all but one are here, which is excellent. Nearly perfect attendance. With that, I'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, and this is oral communications for items not on the agenda. So does anyone in the room or on Zoom have a comment for us before we get to the and I don't see any hands going once, going twice. All right, we will move on to number 3, no announcements or presentations. Here, we do have a matter to deal with, which is it says approval of the minutes, but the draft minutes were omitted from the pack. So we cannot approve them here at this meeting because the public and the members weren't able to see it. So we will be meeting again soon, I suspect, and we will include those minutes together with the draft minutes from this meeting. So those are missing. So apologies for that. We will proceed on to item 5, new business, without having to approve the minutes of the 3 items to discuss today. One is the long delayed fiscal year 22-20 audit. Then we're going to hear the treasurer's report in terms of where we are at the moment on the budget. And then we'll proceed to a very meaty and topical topic as well, the structural deficit alternatives, which is revisiting work the committee has done earlier in the year, but which is now important to talk about some more. So with that, let's get on to 5A, the fiscal year 2022-23 audit review. And to kick off, I'd like to hand that to Tony to present the high-level findings to us.
Okay. Thank you, George.
Okay. You want to try it? I want you to fix that. You want one?
Yeah.
Yeah, could everyone online please mute themselves? Just make sure that you've got the mute button set. I don't have host privileges, so I can't do it here. And we're all hearing some of you.
So just a brief overview. It'll be 3 short presentations tonight. First one will be on the 22-23 audited financials. Second one will be a finance update, treasurer's report. And then the third, as you said earlier, we'll be discussing the structural deficit. So looking at the audit results, we did receive an unmodified or a clean opinion on our financial statements for fiscal year 22-23. Total net position decreased by 1.6 million. The general fund decreased by 1.26 million. And in the memorandum of internal control, there was 1 new finding. So looking at our schedule from the memorandum of internal control, as you can see from 2022 to 2023, we had a significant number of findings. By 23-24, we started clearing up some of them. I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, I think that's our apology.
And then in 24-25, we did clear more of from 23-24. And then in 25-26, we have cleared nearly all of them with the exception of timeliness for completion of audit. And the new memorandum, the new finding was untimely removal of separated signers. That's related to our bank accounts. When someone who is a check signer or has authorization to make bank transactions. We're supposed to notify the bank via resolution that there's to make a change. And with the staff turnover 22-23 through 23-24, those were not done on a timely basis. Although there was no point where there was not an authorized signer on a resolution. So we were not completely out of compliance. It's just notifying the bank of staff changes was a finding considered according to the auditor.
Yeah, I think this is a really important chart. It's very helpful.
Seems to be freezing now. Okay. And then looking at the other audit reports that you received, there was one on the GAN limit. How it was calculated was in compliance with state law. And the other two reports were Measure A and Measure W. These are sales tax measures from the county that fund transportation projects. And we were in compliance with the requirements of those two funding sources as well. And then in the required communications report that the auditor submitted, there were no disagreements with staff or the auditor. So that concludes my presentation for the audited results. I give it back to the council for the committee, the committee for questions.
Great, thank you, Tony. I open it up to the floor here for questions and discussion here on the committee.
I have a question, Tony, on the slide with the memorandum of internal controls.
Mhm.
We had a number of different categories. So what we're just now reviewing is the audited financial statements for the fiscal year end 2023. The chart showed a series of categories that would be comments both prior to that fiscal year as well as all the way through the fiscal year that ends today, which is fiscal year 2026. But I presume that the auditor, clearly the auditor has not completed the audit work for fiscal years 24, 25, and 26.
Correct.
So those, where those issues that were identified in the memorandum of internal controls, is that the town staff's assessment of where we are on those issues, or is that based upon feedback from the auditor?
We've made the correction that the auditor has recommended and have implemented it.
Okay.
And we are required to respond. And so they review our response and then it's just noted. But for our own internal purposes, we have implemented. So you'll see at the next meeting, we have a resolution to change the authorized signers for Bank of America because one of our former assistant town manager, Corey, she was a signer on that account. And so replacing my name with her name. So that's coming in June. And then some of the other, internal controls, separation of duties, we have implemented those changes since I've started in May of 24.
Okay, so that's our collective, let's say, town management. That's our assessment of those issues. It's not it's not the auditor's assessment yet. We would expect them to conform, but that's our assessment, not yet the auditor.
Correct. So when they do the audit, they'll review our procedures and then they'll say, did they actually implement this? And once they make the determination that we have, that finding will come off the memorandum.
Did it make any difference? I assume not, but in the audit I read where the auditor is commenting that prior year significant deficiency changes had not been implemented yet, but of course it wasn't possible for them to, given the delayed nature of
They weren't implemented in 22-23.
Yeah, and so we noted that back to them.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Tony, I've got a couple questions, but you may not be able to answer them completely because you weren't here in town during this fiscal year when we're actually going through it. But I've always wondered about this in audit reports. When you look at the memorandum on internal control and there's criteria, condition, the cause. I'm always interested in where the language for the cause comes from. Is that something in your experience that the auditor
It's,
comes up with?
it's
on
kind
their
of standard language in auditing because they have their own standards that they have to. So the wording has to comply with their own auditing standards. So there should be pretty consistent from audit to audit.
So when they say, for example, due to town staff turnover, financial systems upgrades, impacts from the pandemic, the town did not have enough finance staff to follow up on the outstanding checks in a timely manner. That was not supplied. That judgment wasn't supplied to them probably by someone in the town that was.
Well, that would have been our response. But then they would have drafted it into their memorandum. But in a way that is consistent with auditing standards.
So this is what I'm curious about. Again, this is, you weren't here, so you couldn't comment on, but members of this committee can. During that fiscal year, I was not actually I had been off the committee. I didn't come back on until the back end of this fiscal year, like from January to June of 23. This issue of staff turnover, I assume that implies two things. Number one, first, there weren't enough people maybe, or number two, there weren't enough people trained to do the tasks that were part of the checklist. But my question is, when a problem like that develops, there are certainly people within the department, whoever was acting as finance director or town manager at that time, acting town manager, they should have been aware that these problems existed. So my question is, we think they were aware. Was that reported to the town council? Was the town council aware? And what adjustments were being made in terms of getting additional staff or providing, workarounds for problems? I know we did have at least one consultant that was quite experienced that was working here. I think it was Starla Jerome Robinson, who came over from Menlo Park. She was quite experienced. I know she was working here, but can you comment on that whole thing? It's kind of the old Watergate question of who knew what, and did they know it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't speak for, but I do know that at the time there was 2 people in finance. And so that was where the segregation of duties and the controlled issue became a pretty serious factor. As far as, what was communicated to then town manager, I don't know, or if it was acted upon. I've heard that there was some communication between the town manager and the council, where the former town manager kind of downplayed the seriousness of audits and the completion of the audits. But I mean, I don't have specific information because, again, I wasn't here. This is only from what I've had from internal conversations I've had with staff who were here at that time. But when the finance staff at that time were probably not the most qualified for the positions that they're in. But that was decisions made by the town manager.
Yeah, I can, perhaps other long-term members here can correct me if I'm wrong or add to what I'm saying. My recollection at the time was that we were all dealing with the post-pandemic sort of kind of continuing overhang, with a lot of things being blamed on the pandemic by Jeremy Dennis. The finance staff, we had somebody who'd been elevated into finance from another more administrative function, with running things, attempting to bring up an alternative accounting software at the same time, running our long-standing software. We were dealing with the housing element kind of stuff. There's a lot of staff turnover, and things were pretty much being blamed by Jeremy pandemic in terms of audit delays and things. That's where we were at that time, as I recall.
So what I'm trying to get to, I guess, is what lessons, either this committee or council can take away from this, because the kind of thing you sometimes worry about when there are challenges like this, you want to believe that you have a culture in your staff that when there are problems or people don't know or aren't comfortable doing their jobs or don't feel they have enough resources, that they feel like they can come forward, identify the issues or problems, and that their feedback will be welcome. There'll be attempts to, address it, that type of thing. Now that HR is on your plate, that's obviously something that you care about now. You care about that all the time. So that's not something maybe any of us on this committee can judge, but that's where I was kind of going with that, because none of us want to go through this kind of multi-year problem
Right.
again, and there ought to be some learnings, or maybe some adjustments we make for the future, because we can't predict what might happen. If we had a major natural disaster, we're going to have people that can't come into work or won't come into work, and we're going to be in another situation kind of unlike any we've been in before. And, we don't want to go through the next 3 years like we had to go through during that 21, 22, 23 time period. So that's kind of where I'm going with it.
Yeah, and when it comes to audit schedules and deadlines, the state requires an annual audit. The state controller's office gives us till the end of February of the following year to have a completed financial statement submitted. It used to be December, but with the implementation for recognizing the pension liability and the OPEB liability and the time it was taking to actually calculate, and so they extended the deadline another 2 months. So in a perfect world scenario, if we were caught up with our audits, we would have just completed interim field work for 25, 26. The auditors would be coming back in September to complete field work. Probably October, we're drafting MD&A, reviewing MD&A, going back and forth, and then issuing our financial statements by November. Our organization is not large. We do not have a lot of funds. So, once we get caught up, that's foreseeable. It's fortunately for the last few GASB statements that have been issued, the subscriptions-based information technology agreements and leases, we haven't had a lot. So we kind of fall in it's an immaterial amount. So we're not necessarily required to do these adjustments for fiscal year end. But we're going to get to that point. I'm really confident that we're going to get to that point, and then it's just going to be we're done by November. But in the meantime, I would tell the committee that if you hear otherwise, speak up. So I mean, it should not go beyond February to get audited financial statements once we're current.
So my exposure to this was during that, right at the tail end of that fiscal year. We had a subcommittee here trying to find a way to improve the return on our cash and so. And I was on that committee, and I was trying to get data on the stuff that you have in the regular treasurer's report, like the cash balances in our various buckets, and the payments have been made out, the receipts in, and then the ending balance, traditional treasurer stuff. And none of those reports were being produced, and I couldn't figure out why. And I started to understand that records weren't being kept up. In fact, I found at one point that there was the signature authority to move money was still held by the town manager, who had been gone for 5 months. So I became aware of problems with the records and not being updated. I had to file a public records request to find out what our cash balances were in the banks. It took 39 days to get the report. So I knew about it, and I talked to 1 or 2 members of the council, so they were aware of it. So that was my introduction to this problem. But I don't know if my other colleagues were more exposed to issues during that time than I was. But that's
right. So when I was hired, it was the primary issue. Yes, we're behind in our audits. And so started to address those right away. But after a few weeks, I that's when I realized we're far behind on up-to-date posting of receipts. Payables, we were good, but it was our cash receipts that we were months behind in recording those deposits. So I made the decision, we're going to get current first, and then I'll go back. And the auditor supported me in that, because if we hadn't have done that, we would still be behind the 8 ball. Because we would have been, working on the audits, but yet still falling behind in the current year. So whereas, so for 24, 25 and 25, 26, we are current. I might be a week behind on posting journal entries, but we are absolutely current through the end of May.
Yeah, I agree with that approach. It's rule one of digging holes. You
Yep.
stop digging before you fill them in.
So I have a second area where hopefully we've learned some lessons. And that is that we were running a deficit, which we all know, we understand today, lasted a number of years and put us in a hole.
Mhm.
But I was on the committee at that time, and I don't remember anyone ever telling us or even suggesting that we were running deficits, particularly of the size. We were approving budgets that were basically in balance, but the performance wasn't there. So when did we learn? Why didn't we learn that we were spending more than, that there was a huge variance in our expenditures?
November 2024.
Yeah,
But that's hard to believe in that.
But I came in and I was looking at it and I'm like, wait a minute. We're saying we have a $5 million reserve going into 24, 25, or for 23, 24, when we hadn't taken into consideration the pluses and minuses, the actual results of 22, 23 and 21, 22. And so I recalculated the fund balance reserve. I brought it to this committee, and then I also brought it to the council, but it was November of 2024.
And part of the problem here again is that we had lots of relief money related to COVID flying in,
Yep.
lots of expenses going on associated with everyone being remote and not able to see one another. And then we have this oddity of the way accounting works in a public entity like this, where we have plenty of cash. It's just all earmarked for other things than running the town. And so unlike a small business where I look at my bank balance and it's like, okay, it's hard to hide the fact that, cash is cash. If you're running out as a startup, it's very visible. Here, lots of cash coming in from the government, lots of cash going out, big cash balances, but much of it earmarked to things that we can't spend on for general fund purposes. Right.
Yeah, the cash is not fungible.
But my concern is that the lesson that should be learned is that someone was aware when they signed a check to spend X thousands of dollars, that was never in the budget.
Mhm.
And no one asked the question, how is that going to be funded? And there must be some institutional knowledge here where when that happens, whether it's being recorded and brought to the attention of the appropriate people,
Mhm.
that when you're spending things for things that aren't in the budget and the numbers are fairly large, someone should bring it forward.
And we've done that this
Now,
fiscal year and the previous fiscal year, and when we balanced the budget in 24, 25. It was basically that question. The reserve is not 5 billion as we thought.
So I'll double up what Bill just said, the culture. This needs to be institutionalized in some fashion to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, I think we've done that in the form of management. And I agree with you, Ken, that institutional rigor and process, particularly down at the information level, the accounting level, you have to get that right? Why the whole discipline exists, so that you're actually looking at the reality of the business or the entity you're thinking of, rather than, wishful thinking or the last anecdote or what have you. More comments here before I open it to the public?
My own perspective, exactly on this, the key takeaway from my learning, I've been on this committee only 2 years, is that for any institution like the town that is required to do an audit, if the audit is not done on time, there is a problem. And that fundamentally, while we can talk about culture and process and all of that, for me, the fact that the town did not have timely audits and still does not have timely audits, that is the best objective standard that there is a problem and something needs to be done and looked at closely. The timeliness of the audit is paramount. I think for an institution like that, it's hard to underscore the importance of timely audits and the importance, because that is the result of so many other things that lead to that, and specifically internal controls and regular reporting and accuracy of the reporting. So for me, that's the gold standard. But in order to get there, you need to have all sorts of things in place. I have every confidence that Tony and his team now are getting there. I have every confidence that particularly from the fiscal year 2024 to the one that ends today, 26, it's going to go a lot faster. I am concerned though that we keep on getting pushed back and back on the estimated dates. I think we're going to accelerate, but I would love to get us to be as quick as possible. And my own personal opinion, but recognizing that we may have an OPEB situation and accounting for that, is that the timeliness in audits is, I mean, for SEC public companies, it's 60 days after the end of the fiscal year. The company I work for, we do it 45 days after the end of fiscal year. When I ran a business that required 10 audits for fund accounting, not dissimilar, quite different business, but still fund accounting, we did it 30 days after the fiscal year. All the things that Tony was talking about that are working with the auditor, even in advance of the end of the fiscal year, needs to be done before the end of the fiscal year so that you can actually get things done quickly and then actually use this as a useful tool for the most important constituency, which is the town council, to make decisions. Because frankly, are looking at things that are 3 years hence are not that helpful to the town council and its ability to do or make decisions now. Case in point, we only now know in this audit that actually we had breached the 60% minimum fund balance 3 years ago. And then we're going to continue to see that for the subsequent 3 fiscal years that are audited. And then we'll see where we are with the 20% for the fiscal year 27.
Anything else up here before I go to comment? Right, anyone here in the room? Hearing no one, I'll try to go in order. I think Rita, you had your hand up first. Why don't you say hi?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. Perhaps we didn't, manager or with staff. We're talking skills, abilities, whatever you want to call it. But the residents of Trollo Valley have been asking about finances and audits since 2020. I can gladly share all the emails that I have back and forth, how things are moving along. Turns out that nothing was moving forward at all. But since December 2020, I started putting in writing and asking it, and pretty much asking it every time that the finance committee did have a meeting, it was asked. And so if anyone else is looking outside trying to figure out who was asking, who was making these questions public, there were people that in each council meeting were asking these same questions about the audit and the yearly finances and different checks. And there were people for the during the finance meetings asking for the, and we were really getting the runaround and and told that, oh, none of the other towns. I personally called all of each one was current in their audits and their finances, and we were the only ones, and we were losing staff, and we are in a position where we're asking the to vote for the residents to pay more money, and we're only now at a hint of what happened in 23. And yes, you see that, oh, everything's good now, but we're more behind than the last time we heard. I don't know if you can hear me, but we're more behind than the last time we heard the timeline for these audits. So it's, we have things that need to get fixed in our town. But we can't make plans, but we're still monthly spending lots and lots of money on contractors that are doing whack-a-mole problems from the past. So let's get this together so we can move forward, because it's going to be awfully hard. Remember, at the best isn't done. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Dale, I think you're next.
Thank you. Just a quick question. When was the last audit where we didn't have any of these findings? Was that 2019? And the follow-up is, all of a sudden we went from clean, no findings to, nothing. We didn't do anything right for 5 years. And I think we deserve an explanation, kind of for that huge transgression. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, Dale, that probably was the last good audit was before COVID hit. And I think the proximate cause, at least just observationally from my perspective, was the change in leadership. We had a long-term finance person leave, and then we had someone promoted into the spot, and then things started to unravel at the same time. We all got locked into our homes for a couple of years.
Just want to clarify, this is a clean audit. This we're talking about memorandum of internal controls. I mean, there's 3 key elements of an audit.
Yeah.
That this is a clean opinion.
No, that's a great point. No, I really appreciate that clarification, Mark. I guess when we're just talking about the, falling behind on our auditability because of journal entry errors and all the rest, that really kicked off, is what I understand. And then part of what obscured it as well is, for a while, we were running 2 different accounting softwares because the point had been made, as I recall, that our long-standing software package was inadequate and was kind of falling apart. So we were trying to bring up a new one, and at the same time running the old one. So a lot of the lack of reporting was blamed on the fact that we had 2 systems running in parallel at the same time. And again, we were all doing these meetings remotely while, watching our television about COVID.
Yeah, it was not a good implementation.
Okay, let's see. We heard from Dale. David Cardinal.
Hi. First, obviously, I agree that audits are necessary and important, but I think they're a little bit like the video review we're getting used to in the World Cup, where something's already gone wrong. So from my point of view, and I've not run town, thank God, but I have run private and public and NGO organizations. And to me, the backbone of it is having a CFO that I can trust, or we can trust in this case, and believe what the financials say. Because by the time you're doing an audit, if there's something wrong, it's way in the rearview mirror. It happened last year, essentially. So in this case, I think we can all pin the tail on plenty of donkeys for the past. But the key to me is to have a person, in this case, in Tony, and a town manager who knows what they're doing, in this case, Darcy, and then a finance committee who can trust that they're getting the right information from them. And then, the audit should be, you're not doing an audit in 45 days if there's something wrong. Basically, you have to get everything right, and then you can do an audit in 45 days. So I think the first thing is to make sure we start, and I think we are, getting everything right, and look forward once we clean up the rearview mirror part. So I'm encouraged by the new team, and I think we just need to make sure we get things right, and that management and the finance committee have the right data real time, not in the rearview mirror, also in the rearview mirror. Thanks. That's it.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, David. I agree. Audit should be confirmatory. And I also agree with Mark's earlier point that, not having an audit on time is a red alert. And the only reason I can point to on why, everyone from the town council on down wasn't jumping up and down was we all had this once in a century kind of calamity afflicting the world at the same time that had was the universal explanation for everything, even though in this case, that wasn't the real explanation. So it won't happen again, is my point. More commentary up here. I don't see more hands online. We can do that.
Yeah, I have I think, I hope it's an easy one as for Tony. One of the things that's in the audit report is it talks about our OPEB liability, and there is a 115 trust the town set up. I think they funded it back in 20 or 21. If I understand the report correctly, we are now overfunded in that trust by about $317,000 or something.
But it'll fluctuate with.
Yeah, so you get an annual, I think, actuarial update and so forth, and it's affected not just by interest, the rate of return, but also about changes in the staffing. So I was trying to understand how we got so overfunded. I remember when I came off the committee, we had talked about funding it at a fairly high level, but I don't know what the final dollar amount was.
It was staff turnover.
It was a staff. So the people we were going to be funding in the future disappeared.
Right.
And so we ended up being overfunded because of so much staff turn. So question is now, I mean, the markets are doing fine. We're probably, with the money we have in there now, we're probably staying well ahead of whatever the discount rate is on the OPEB liability. Do you know of any mechanism by which the town can claw back money, an overfunded amount of that size in an OPEB trust? I don't know if that's possible, but generally we don't want that money unavailable to us.
Right.
If we don't need it to be there.
Right. Even though investment returns have been good, the premiums have shot higher than what the investment returns are. So we're looking at 12 to 13% increases in medical premiums. So, and we have all but 2 staff that are in medical plans now. So, the 22-23, there was maybe 5 or 6 employees enrolled in the OPEB liability, where now we have about 11 or 12 enrolled. So that's going to increase the liability tenfold. I haven't done the calculation yet, or haven't received the valuation report yet. But I'm pretty sure we may be in surplus to 22-23, but we're not going to be for 23-24, 24-25.
So you think it's possible that the liability, that the overfunding might come down because of that.
Yep.
But to the issue of, in a scenario where you were funded, is there a mechanism to claw? We're all looking for places to get money,
Right.
Free money. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not heard of it, but we can have the conversation with PERS and show them the calculations and see what they say.
Is that something you could do, or do you want one of us
No, I could do that.
to do that? I'm
I can do
actually
that.
curious about that.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to know.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. There may be a penalty. So if we withdraw,
More questions or comments about the 22-23 audit?
Sure, I'm seeing Dale's hand still up.
Yeah, but Dale, do you have an extra comment, or did we deal with it? Dale, your hand is up. Yeah, I thought that's just persistent hand. We'll go with that unless we hear from Dale. Okay, hearing nothing here, can I have a motion to recommend that the town council approve the audit?
Just a quick clarification that no one accepts the audit. The way that I haven't read the engagement letter with the auditor, but the way it works in auditing is that you pay for the independence of an expert opinion. So you're not in a position to either accept it or reject it.
Right.
What I believe that this committee is formed for, one of its 2 primary purposes is to recommend to the town council the adoption or acceptance. It's adoption of the budget, but I think it may be acceptance of the financial statements that are audited. So it's actually the work product is by the town staff that's audited independently And then, so so with that clarification, I would move that that this committee recommend to the town council the acceptance of the fiscal year 2023 financial statements.
Is there a second? In favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anyone? And Mark, thank you for the clarification. You said it the right way. With that, we can move on to the next item, which I believe is the main event. And that's going to concern our structural deficit with
Excuse me, treasurer's report is what I
We're
have.
doing-
Sorry, treasurer's report. Yes, excuse me. I elided right over that because I don't have a printout in front of me. All right. Yes, Tony, please tell us our current situation and then we can talk about how to work on the deficit.
So, little finance update, update on cash balance. We have about 25.5 million in our banks, and this is split between TechCU, Bank of America, Leif, and Schwab. And for interest year to date, we've earned about 770,000. With most of that interest coming from Schwab. Looking at our cash balance by fund on our ledger, it's 25.2 million. The difference between what's in our bank statement and what's in our ledger is deposits in transit and outstanding checks. But for the general fund, it's about 2.4 million is our cash balance. Then looking at our restricted funds, just highlighting a few, open space is broke the $10 million barrier. It's almost 10.4 million. Measure A, Measure W is 1.6 and 1 million. And these are high because we have not, past 2 years, we have not really done any road resurfacing, which will be rectified this year or 26, 27. And then our inclusionary and lieu fund has 5.2 million. And then looking at the other funds, those are the road maintenance districts, about $740,000. Now we're fiduciaries for these funds. We really do not have any control other than we just collect the revenue. And then if the road maintenance districts submit an expense, we just process the payment. But like I said, we're fiduciaries for these, we're custodians more or less. And when you see on the fund balance report, we don't carry a fund balance for these because we have no equity in the road maintenance district funds and their operations. So this slide is change in fund balance. General fund currently running, and these are through the end of May. So the general fund is currently running a deficit of $216,000. We did adopt a budget. So we did adopt a deficit budget. Then we increased it a little bit more in mid-year. So we are on track with what we had budgeted. The current general fund balance is 32.81%. So we are above the 20% reserve level. General fund revenues year to date are a little bit under 7 million and the expenses are 7.2. Total revenues from all funds is 10 million with total expenses of 8.7 million. So total fund balance is going to increase about 1.3 million, or it's up 1.3 million as of the end of May. So that's my report. Back to the committee for questions.
Super. Clarifying questions from us and then the public, and then we'll go discuss.
Tony, is this a report we're going to see quarterly? Is it?
At minimum quarterly.
At minimum.
But the goal is to have it monthly. But it's going to be maybe, so July's report will come in September. Just based on meeting scheduling and getting everything, because we usually are done by mid-month with all the revenue posting. So for July, even though the month will close July 31st, it'll be August 15th when we're done posting everything for the month, or we have the month end close, and then generating the reports, it would require, if the finance committee wants to review it, then the finance committee would meet monthly. But there will be some lag between the end of the month and when the report comes to either the committee or to the council.
And do you know where it'll be posted on the website? It may be there now, but I never can find it.
It'll be posted on the treasurer. It'll be posted on the finance page on the website. There will be a treasurer's report section, just like there's one for audit and budget. We'll have it there'll be treasurer's report. But once it's accepted by council, then we'll post it onto the website.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was just wondering, going from the June 30, 23 management discussion and analysis, there were assigned reserves assigned in the general reserve. And I honestly don't recall ever changing those numbers. And there's the new assigned, like, who came up with the new?
I reallocated them proportionately from the 23 numbers, or it was whatever the OPEB liability was.
Well, like the pension reserve fell off. I don't know what UAL, what's UAL?
That's the unfunded actuary liability.
Oh, that's like the pension?
Yeah.
Oh, so it went from 1.4 million to?
Yeah.
like
Yeah, because
250?
the 22, 23 numbers were based on a higher
Oh.
fund balance. So if we've reduced fund balance below the 22, 23 number,
Okay,
I've dropped the numbers down proportionately.
okay, yeah, so the committee never, or the
Right.
council never actually
Yeah,
came up
yeah.
with these numbers?
Yeah, because if I didn't adjust them, then I would be showing a negative unassigned
Right, okay.
amount. Yeah, but you're correct that yes, annually, these numbers need to be adopted by council. They have not been for quite some time. Yeah. Yeah.
Tony, at a high level, the aggregate cash balance actually does increase, but the general fund decreases. But in aggregate, it's now 25 million. And I know that the funds are, there's an investment policy that relates to the investment of these $25 million. So prior to being on this committee, I was on the County of San Mateo Bond Oversight Committee, which looked at the municipal bonds that are issued within San Mateo County. There, at the time that I served a 2-year term, the balance was over 400 million, but these were all for capital projects. And therefore, there was a schedule that very much related to the disbursement of that 400 million over the next 5-6 years.
Right.
Here, I'm sure that we have a similar kind of staging and how we use these funds. The ones that I'm curious about are the two biggest, which are the open space fund, now over 10 million, and the in lieu fund, inclusionary in lieu, of over 5 million. So that constitutes, the majority of this total. Given that those don't seem to have specific schedules to deploy the capital, what is the investment policy that how do you then match the expected disbursement if we don't know when they're going to be dispersed?
So the investment policy is investment of surplus cash. And the distribution of funds is based on average cash balance. So it's they keep track monthly of the cash balance. So whatever the monthly average comes out to, and then it's weighted against everybody else, and then it gets allocated annually. But as far as, do I have funding plans and, I'm anticipating to spend X amount of dollars in this fund, I don't have that schedule yet. But
right now, it doesn't matter that much because the yield curve's pretty flat.
Right.
But in an upward sloping yield curve, it matters a fair amount as to whether there's a capital deployment 10 years from now,
right,
where you can get materially higher returns, because all of this is going to be investment grade securities, which is primarily treasuries.
Right.
So if there's an upward sloping yield curve, it's really important to say, yes, I will put this $10 million in a 10-year treasury because that has the highest yield and that's when it's going to mature to pay. But I don't know how you can do that if we have no idea when these monies are going to be spent. So my guess is that it's just kind of bundled, is it
Yeah.
all?
Yeah, there's,
Can I jump in here?
sure.
Because I think I know where Mark's coming from. So the first thing, it doesn't have to be this way. Maybe it shouldn't be this way in the future. But as of now, all of the cash from investment purposes is together. We don't have separate accounts at least not the brokerage firms or the banks for like the open space and the inclusionary in lieu of. Tony does that allocation. So it's all a single group and he allocates the investment returns to each of them. So that's kind of point one. So you don't have a account mechanism where you can, in one account, you can have a different, be on a different part of the yield curve in one versus another. It's all on the same yield curve, the way it's done today. So that's number one. Number two, the biggest part of the money is at the Schwab account, and that's right now in three buckets. It's in basically it's a 30-day T-bill money market account earning 3.8% or something like whatever. I mean, it's a good return. It's whatever you can get. And then there's two exchange traded funds. One's a government short-term fund. The other one's a corporate. They're both from Vanguard. They're 2 to 3 years average maturity, and they hold between them about 10 or 11 million. And we have not very often, occasionally we have adjusted, moved money from one to the other, based on where we think interest rates are going and so forth to optimize it. So that's the way the world is today. So what you're talking about, I think is a good idea at some point. And I think first step would involve setting up separate accounts and then adjusting your allocations for each account based on the factors you're talking about. Now, what you may or may not be aware, I think you are aware, we're severely restricted by the California government code in terms of what we can invest in and how long the maturities can be. We can't buy any individual issue or any, whether it's federal or anything else, or through a mutual fund or anything other vehicle that has longer than a 5-year maturity at the time we buy it. So we're kind of stuck in the short to intermediate range. We couldn't buy a 10-year treasury from the Fed if we wanted. So that's the world we live in. And as you know, that kind of gives you a fairly limited range where you can, adjust things. So that's the world today. I think we have all the vehicles under the code that we need to do whatever we want to do. It comes down to how active do we want to be about, again, segregating accounts and changing investment strategies and all that kind of stuff, which is, stuff I'm very interested in and open to.
Yeah. Schwab's about 2 years yield to maturity. Yeah. And then Leif, it's a little bit more of a shorter term. So most of our investments are between 1 to 2 years. We can go 5 years out. CDs are 4%, 1 to 5 years. I mean, we can park some money there and ladder it, just ride the yield curve. But I did speak with our investment broker yesterday, Nicholas at Schwab, because I was looking at our treasuries, and that's the one where we're taking a beating on. But I mean, if you look at Schwab's performance, I mean, it's it's like the mountain in Price is Right. I mean, it just keeps going up. And but I mean, like I have talked to Nick, and he said we can purchase treasuries individually. So there are some options, but we can't go more than 5 years. And the other item you're talking about is, do we have any type of long-term financial spending plan in place? We don't. We're getting there. So
One point I just want to comment on from a policy standpoint, and I'm reasonably sure the people at the Open Space Committee and elsewhere would agree with this. One problem with making a long-term horizon like 10 years, we're fine, is that the open space opportunities are one of these lumpy things that occurs,
Mhm.
at random intervals, suddenly a property is available, someone has passed away or they're leaving town, or there's this thing that's a window that you could potentially move on, but only for the next 90 days, and then it may be gone for another decade. So
Right.
that would be a concern I bet they would have.
Right. And so the three guiding principles for the investment policy is safety, liquidity, and yield, and having our funds liquid to deal with if a open space parcel did come up, we can access that fund or that funding rather quickly. So, but you got to balance all three. So sometimes for the sake of liquidity, you might be sacrificing yield. You don't want to sacrifice safety, but I mean, it is a balancing act.
One other thing I'll add is a couple of the committees in town, especially open space, who know that their money is kind of long-term. They don't know when it's going to be spent. It could be 5 years, it could be 3 years, whatever. They are actually one of the committees that is interested in having a carve out a separate account of their stuff so that perhaps they can be in a different place with the allocation for that purpose than some of the other uses that might be more short term. So we have other groups in town that are I don't think we have a committee that looks at the inclusionary in lieu of fund, but that's another kind of long term. I think that's money for developers to develop like low income housing or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for affordable housing. Yeah.
Right. So those would be two examples where you could justify a separate account with a different, it doesn't change the kind of stuff we can buy, but it changes where we might choose to be in terms of short versus long term and all that kind of stuff.
Other questions on this right now? Is there any public commentary on the treasurer's report? Okay, I see David Cardinal, New Hand.
Hi, a quick note, and it hasn't come up yet, but as far as splitting the funds, if I was one of those two groups responsible for disbursement, I'd be much happier to be part of a larger pool because Tony can manage liquidity. If the open space fund has to manage their own, then they're only going to have what they're liquid for, and the same for the development fund. So honestly, I think pooling them gives us a lot more flexibility, but I'll defer to when that discussion actually happens. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dale, your hand has been up a long time. I don't know if that's an artifact from the last time or not. Oh, it just went away. So good. Betsy Morgenthaler.
Yes, thank you. I would rather not speak to the open space conversation, but thank you around the dais. I appreciate that it's happening. I concur that we have been patiently waiting and are still interested in a separate account. But the purpose of my hand raise has to do with a posting question, an online posting question, which one of you posed earlier on. And I think it's relatively straightforward question for Tony to consider, if not respond to. And that is the audit page on our town website. We can find audits up through June 30th, year end June 30th, 2021. As we pass, or as the committee and town council accepted the audit of 2022, late last summer, early fall, I wondered whether there was something delaying its posting and when we might expect the audit you've just reviewed and are proposed to accept, when it might be posted. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, 21-22 will be posted soon. I mean, immediately. And 22-23, once council accepts it, we'll post it to the website. But yeah, the 21-22 audit, that's oversight on my part.
Okay. Very good. Anything more up here on this topic before we move on? Okay, we're going to move on to 5C. This will be an important discussion for the town. This is regarding our structural deficit, and I'll make a couple of prefatory remarks, and then I'm hoping maybe Tony can set the stage to get us to the current story of the film as it's unwinded so far. As everybody in town knows, we're under fiscal pressure for a number of reasons here in town. We have had a lot of extremely high expenses, primarily public safety from the sheriff's budget, structurally getting much higher post-COVID, and continuing on a very steep trajectory without good options there. We had a lot of expenses related to the housing element from the every 8-year renewal of the regional housing needs allocation, et cetera. As a town, we've been very proud of being frugal and low tax and also very residential and rural in orientation. The downside of the rural orientation, it means most of the businesses that pay tax revenue are located elsewhere, things like hotels and retail businesses and that sort of thing. And so that has set us up to have a structural deficit whereby we are capable of almost balancing the budget right now, but only by significantly underspending on things like capital improvements and even in some cases not spending road maintenance dollars and other dollars where we have to have matching general fund contributions, et cetera. So it's not a sustainable course. So I'm hoping Tony can set the stage for us on that. Then we can revisit here with the committee some of the work we did earlier this year on potential revenue measures. And then there's always the measure of the alternative of just spending less, which obviously everyone should think about and examine as well. Tony.
Yep. Thank you, George. So on your screen, you should see the fiscal forecast. This is revised based through the adopted 26-27 budget. And again, tracing the black line, that's our reserve. But just to review the other lines, the red line is our expense track. The green line is our revenue track. And that gap is about $700,000. The blue line is our fund balance reserve, or 20%, and that's 20% of operating expenses. The reserve line, although it goes up, it doesn't go up at the same trend as the expense line. It's because it's only gone up 20% of the expense line. But the way our current operations are tracking, we're looking at the end of fiscal year 27-28 to be at or just slightly above the 20% reserve, dipping below the 20% reserve through 28-29. And then by 2030-31, the reserve would be at zero. Without new revenue, the way to keep the black line above the reserve level target of 20% would be a reduction in expenses. The budget presented 26-27 is a snapshot of what the town needs currently to maintain operations. If we were to close the structural gap, that would just keep the town on life support. Still would not allow us to make any significant investment in capital improvements. There are some mandates that we have to do, and you'll see in the next slide where I've identified some funding needs. But for example, the maintenance of effort in road resurfacing requires $350,000 every year from the general fund. We currently haven't funded that in the last 2 fiscal years. There's also some one-time needs. Our vehicle fleet, there was a rule from the state of California that we need to start replacing our fleet with electric vehicles. And any vehicle that's over 18 years needs to be removed from the fleet. We currently have 3 trucks that are at 18 years. So we have, there's some movement that we need to make on our vehicle fleet replacement. But looking at that list, some funding needs and policy questions. So yeah, starting with the structural deficit, $700,000. Road resurfacing MOE, it's $350,000. That's $1,050,000 right there. We also have some deferred maintenance that's ongoing. Right now, it's about $150,000. And that's just replacing some infrastructure items within our buildings. And then looking at our CIP, we do need to do a storm drain master plan. The last one was done in 1970. And that master plan or the assessment identified about $300,000 to $400,000 worth of repairs back then. And so taking $1970 and fast forwarding them to 2026, that's a conservative estimate of $5 million in maintenance and repairs just to the storm drain system. My gut is telling me that number is going to be a little bit higher, but and then ongoing facility replacement. We've got our playgrounds, we've got our ballparks, we've got our soccer fields. Looking about $200,000 in there. Irrigation, we have a lot of sprinkler heads that are broken. They need to be replaced. Possibly need to replace the irrigation system as well. IT, we need to really redo the IT infrastructure. I mean, the issues at the schoolhouse are well documented, but we are in the process of selecting a new IT provider, and part of that assessment is going to be just actually have a strategic plan in regards to our IT infrastructure instead of just, Scotch tape and rubber bands. And then, so looking at some ongoing costs, it's about 1.4 million. Some one-time costs, specifically the storm drain master plan, vehicle replacement, the irrigation and the IT. It's about 2.4 million total. And then potential items down the line, storm drain repairs by those that are identified in the master plan. And then our pension liability is currently 2 million. So looking at our long-term plans, again, storm drain master plan, storm drain repairs and improvements would probably be priority once we have the storm drain master plan in place. But then other policy questions are, do we keep the reserve level at 20%? Do we want to increase it? And then if we want to do any additional contributions to PERS to reduce the pension liability over time. So that's how I'm going to be framing this conversation. If there's anything else that the committee would want to consider and add, I'm absolutely more open. I'm not married to this list. It's just things that I've identified over the past year or so that the town really needs to look at in regards to long-term planning and for funding needs. So with that, I give it back to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Discussion, commentary, please.
I just read in the paper that the county was going to receive vehicle license fees. Does that impact us at all?
Yeah, we'll get some of the shortfall. I know it was announced today. I haven't looked at actually how much we're going to get, but we will receive. I believe it's 200,000. That was the original estimate. But the VLF is an ongoing negotiation every year. So we do receive. I budget what the county tells us we're going to get, which is what they have on hold for us. But the shortfall is what's negotiated annually between the legislature and the county.
Sorry. So what they agreed to a couple of days ago, that amount was not in the budget?
It's not in the budget currently, no.
And you think it's in the range of
200,000, I believe.
Nowhere
Yeah.
close.
So I'll make a mid-year adjustment for that.
So nowhere close to the 2.4 million.
Yeah.
So would that balance the budget this year almost?
Just asking.
Well, I mean, it'll reduce the deficit from 685,000 to 485,000. But we're still gonna have a deficit.
Safety resilience, wildfire safety, I don't see that on here. Yeah, Mayor Taylor is asking, he's in the room asking about safety.
Well, that would come in under maintenance. I just didn't spell it. I mean, there's it's maintenance throughout the town. So trail maintenance, brush maintenance, that's where I've identified it.
So I'm trying to remember, the last time I remember we needed a big chunk of money for the town was when we just found out we were sitting on a fault line here in the town. We couldn't get insurance to protect our town employees. So we had the town center built, and we didn't have the money for that. That's not something that you put in a budget. But we should start thinking and looking back at how we did that. There was a lot of private fundraising that went along with that. I think there was some tax revenue, but it wasn't anything close to what we were going to need. People probably feel differently about giving to a town center than they do to a storm drain repair, unless we give naming rights for it, for example, which is it's not out of the question. Bill Lane's got his name on the building, right? I assume they made a major donation from his estate or whatever it was. So at least a portion of our solution for the long-term big ticket items is probably going to have to be something we try to do without taxing people. We may have to get, I can think there's a lot of, I know the gift fund is fairly new and starting up. I don't know what's in there now and what that was going to be intended for, but I assume that some of this kind of long-term permanent infrastructure stuff might be where we go to, shore up part of it. And the taxing, I think of as more for the sort of the regular ongoing needs of the town.
Right.
It's kind of the way I think about it.
I think just by way of update, this is my understanding. So when this committee last met, which was June 2nd, and we met for the purpose of looking at the upcoming budget for the fiscal year starting tomorrow. And at that time, what we went through was a deficit budget that had a deficit of $584,000. At the town council meeting that took place just last week on June 24th, the actual budget that was adopted had a deficit that was larger than that. The specific deficit for the upcoming fiscal year starting tomorrow is $679,000. So the other thing that was talked about at that town council meeting was the process and anticipation of the timeline to get from here to November. When this committee over the last couple of years, this is just my perception or my conclusion, is that there was really just two possibilities in terms of increasing taxes that were possibly within the town council's ability to at least put on a ballot for the voters to vote upon that would make any difference whatsoever. One was a parcel tax, which would require 2/3 majority, and the other was adopting a charter city with a real estate transfer tax. And that was, so the town council hired a couple consultants. They did some surveys and did some work. And at least it's my interpretation that the town council came to the provisional conclusion that the only viable tax increase would be the charter city plus the real estate transfer tax. And therefore, there's a whole sequence of events to lead to the November ballot. What then, actually, this was in preparation for this meeting, I read the packet, which I was actually surprised to see that the day after, specifically June 25th, after the day after the town council meeting, there was some type of deal cut that I don't frankly understand exactly how or why it was cut, but it was the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association that had already qualified to put on the ballot this Save Prop 13 initiative. But then it looks like the Assembly and the Senate, supported by the governor, were going to put in place some other different type of, this is unclear to me. I don't understand how the Assembly supports something, the Senate supports something, the governor supports something, but it still needs to go on the ballot in November. I don't understand that. It was So that at least my reading of the Cal Matters article was not clear. At least maybe people who understand politics better than I do can explain that. But the takeaway was that it looked to me like instead of the possibility of having a charter city with and an associated real estate transfer tax be approved at a 50% plus one threshold, it looked like it was very much more likely. I'm not. It's not. This part's unclear to me. Much more likely that it would be a two-thirds threshold now in order to do that. I think that that's where we are now. So maybe if I just pause there because my understanding may be wrong.
So I dug into this a lot because I was kind of worried about the Jarvis thing. So what I understand happened, it happened literally, 30 minutes before midnight, when the Jarvis initiative would have been on the ballot, cut the deal you're talking about, where who knows what exactly how that was done. But what it does is basically the Jarvis initiative will not be on the ballot. That initiative would have taken away the ability of a charter city to enact a new real estate transfer tax. Period. That's what it would do. And it would, if there were any existing real estate transfer taxes that had been enacted by cities, they would sunset in 2 years. So now, why was that done? Because the other issue that Jarvis Group cared a lot about is the ability of special taxes not being able to get passed with only a 50+1 if they are initiated by a public group. The way a lot of people were trying to get around the 2/3 requirement is they would get not a government initiated or council initiated ballot measure. They'd get a citizens group, usually funded by whoever the interests were in it, to initiate an initiative, which, because it was publicly initiated, would only require a 50+1. The Jarvis Group cared even more about killing that than they did about killing the real estate transfer tax now. So the deal they cut meant they're getting rid of, you won't be able to get a citizens group to only meet a 50+1 standard. They now have to meet the 2/3 standard that anything else does. And it also means for this round, the real estate transfer tax ban will not be on the ballot. And I don't know this for a fact, I do not think the Jarvis Group is giving up on trying to kill the real estate transfer tax. I mean, I know that especially in Southern California, where they've got really big transfer taxes, the real estate groups, the developers, the agent, I mean, they're just up in arms over the thing. I mean, it really drives up their costs. And so it's going to be coming back, but it won't be an issue we have to worry about in terms of what this town does, at least for now. But I mark my words, it's coming back. They've been trying to kill this thing for a long time. That's one of the reasons a lot of us were concerned about going too far down that road. I mean, it's potentially, even if we had a real estate transfer tax or do have it on the ballot this time, it could have been killed the same night if the Jarvis initiative hadn't been pulled. In fact, I remember there was a discussion, maybe it was at the council level, we were talking about who can race to the San Mateo County's office to get their vote certified quicker. So that if we could get our real estate transfer tax passed and certified, 20 minutes before the Jarvis thing, then we'd have at least 2 years before the money got cut off. But that, we don't have to worry about that issue now. So it actually makes it the ability to get a real estate transfer tax passed is not affected. That's still 50+1. You don't have to worry about a Jarvis thing killing it, regardless of what the citizens of the town want to do. I mean, that's maybe more detail than you need to know, but that's what I understand.
So just so I'm clear, the transfer tax that we might vote on in November is 50+1. It's not.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a general tax. And just to add, the reason why what the legislature agreed upon has to go to vote because it's a constitutional amendment. So if they amend the state constitution requires, unless the legislature passes it by 2/3, I believe. But it was a similar situation with the SB1 back in, I think, 2017, where the legislature approved the new fees and everything, but they still put it on the ballot the following year to ratify what the legislature had approved. But since this is going to be on the ballot as a constitutional amendment, it's going to require a vote from the state.
So in terms of where the town sits now, looking forward, so it sounds like this is I thank you for that interpretation because it was quite confusing to me. So it sounds like it's now more clear that the threshold to pass a real estate transfer tax is 50% +1.
That's always been clear. That wasn't changed. What happened 2 days ago. It just means the threat of a separate statewide initiative passing, saying you can't, a charter town can't pass and I'm wrong about that. It was going to say the charter city can't pass a real estate transfer tax with only 50.1. So that risk is gone for now, temporarily.
Okay, so that would strike me then, therefore, that based upon this whatever agreement was struck on the June 25th, then that makes frankly more clear. It reduces a risk for the whatever the town votes in November. If it is a voting on a real estate transfer tax, it reduces the risk of that being invalidated either in the year or in 2 years' time.
It actually eliminates the risk for now until,
Okay.
2 years from now, we'll probably be talking about this again, I'm guessing, if we had a real estate transfer tax.
Given that's the case, and again, I could be wrong, but my interpretation is this is the path that the town council is is advocating and leading. So that then leads to, what is unclear to me is that if the town then does go to a vote that requires only a simple majority in November in order to pass a real estate transfer tax, therefore the input that perhaps this committee might be focused on is at what level is that? And so looking at the materials by the real estate, or actually by the tax preparer, like Cohn, I forget her name. Yeah, Paula Cohn. Yeah, my recollection is like the data that she had was that there are about 40 sales per year. Now the gap, what's interesting is that like this structural deficit, Tony, that you cite here, and by the way, I do have an objection to that term, but that's okay. Let's just use it for sake of discussion. If it's 700,000, the number I had been looking at before was 1.5 million, which with 40 real estate transactions per year, that would have been a 37,500 per sale per year. Now, then you would determine exactly like how much per $1,000 you would do it. You do that. So is that what we are? Is that what we're looking to provide some perspective to the town council, is on the presumption that there is a majority of the town's voters that do support the real estate transfer tax, then what should that level be? I'm just trying to understand where we're focused now.
So I think the council has not officially requested either any of us individually or as a group to recommend what they should do. We want to talk about it just because we care about it and we have views on it, and our discussion is probably helpful to them to vet all the concerns. I think if the council was talking, they'd say they have not made a decision that it's going to be a real estate transfer tax. They think that's a good candidate. It probably is the leading candidate. It's just as you said, it's the one they went out and tested last fall to see if it would, statistically significantly enough get a vote more than 50+1. I think came back looking, it was like 61 or 62% or so forth. They did not test any other tax measure as part of that. I think as maybe had to do some to do with savings for the cost. I think it probably had more to do with, too many surveys and you start losing the statistical significance of whatever you learn. Whatever. So they got data on one measure. That was probably their leading measure. And given the recordings I've listened to, I think it still is. And I think they've also talked about, what would the rate have to be at to generate $1 million a year, 1.5. I think that issue is very much still open, probably more so than the issue. I think they're pretty much going towards real estate transfer tax. I wanted to get another option more firmly on the table for consideration, which is that's kind of outlined in that. My public comment was made in writing a couple times. With an option that also required only a 50.1, which would be an increase in the general fund portion of the utility tax. I think a year and a half ago, we had a subcommittee that looked at all of these things. They looked at different permutations on UUT, like taking some of the open space piece and doing some other things. They may not have specifically singled out this just to an increase from 5.5% on the general UUT to something else. But I wanted to get that back in discussion because it only requires 50 plus 1. And I like the fact that everybody in town was going to, would pay for that. The cost of this tax increase wouldn't be concentrated in a very small number of people and a very large dollar amount. That just didn't feel, in my case, I just didn't feel like it felt right to me, but at least I wanted to make sure there was another alternative on the table. I think I wrote to George and said, I think we ought to talk about it. I think the council would welcome having, all possible ideas out there. I even raised the possibility of having 2 competing ballot measures, mainly as a defense against the Jarvis initiative. Because if that had gone through, that could have killed a real estate transfer tax, even if we had, potentially passed it. And so I said, well, if we have 2 measures, whatever one gets the most votes could pass. I still think that's still something to consider, even if we don't have to worry about the Jarvis thing. The reality is we don't really know what our town is willing to sign up for. We've got a lot of uncertainties given comments we've heard from the public over the many months coming in here. And, so we're kind of in an uncertain place. I think most of us, not all of us, think the town just does need to get some more money, not clear how much. I think we want to optimize our chances to let our citizens pick an option that's most comfortable for them, regardless of what any of us personally would like. I'm not moving anywhere, so I'd be perfectly happy with real estate transfer taxes. I'm not going to be paying it for a long time, but I don't think I should be. None of us want to make a judgment just for ourselves. So that's kind of probably more than you wanted to know, but that's I think where they're at.
Yeah, and I think Mayor Taylor, yeah. Yeah, can you go to the mic so people online can hear you? Yeah, please.
So just to add a little more sort of commentary around this, and thanks, Bill. I mean, I think you've described a lot of these issues. The first one is the parcel tax fairly early on, I think got pretty low on our list because that requires 2/3. So that's, so we looked at that. When you're talking about this, probably going to come back with Jarvis. One of the things is maybe it's going to come back, but with a limit rather than an elimination. So that may be another piece because some, in Southern California, they're quite high. And so that might be another piece of that. So, but we won't know. And that's all sort of future speculation. So then I think the council's been looking at sort of roughly 1.5 to 2 million. It's not 700,000. 700,000, we're still in a sense deficit spending because we're not funding any of our capital stuff. And I would argue that we're allowing our safety to continue to get worse. So at least from the council's point of view, 700,000 has never been the target. And so the UUT bill, I thought that was a really interesting idea. It just didn't look like enough money to get us to 1.5 unless you raised it quite substantially. So I'd like to hear your guys' opinion, but I think the target money that we're looking to raise is somewhere in the 1.5 to $2 million when you're thinking about it. So then the pieces that I'm hoping will come to the council is, how do we think about modeling the income, and particularly over years where there are more sales and there are less sales, that notion of, how do we make sure there's enough money there without just piling up more and more money? So I think some advice from this committee to the council, I think that would be helpful. So like I said, sort of modeling the income as part of this process. And then maybe a sense on maybe a range of rates. I don't think we're looking for the finance committee to say, oh, it should be, this number to the third decimal point. I think we're looking for sort of a range, and, why would we pick the lower end of the range and why would we pick the higher end of the range? So hopefully that's helpful as you guys sort of continue your discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, that is really helpful. Thank you. And, yeah, please.
So the town council has not adopted any resolution, just to be very clear, and it still has to have an in-depth discussion of what is the range we're looking at. We've, in passing, discussed certain parameters, but honestly, if you want to weigh in on things that we should consider, meaning thoughtful things you want to make sure we are aware of. I don't want you to think that we've already narrowed it beyond where we in fact are. And, we have meetings coming up where, we would look to you for thoughts. I just don't, we're not looking for direction, but thoughts and informed comments would be welcome.
Great. Thank you very much. I just have a couple of remarks on the overall scope of things and some of my thinking around what I've heard and what we've been talking about for the last couple of years. The first is on the utility user tax. I can see the point that this is pay as you go. The burden is spread equally amongst everyone who's enjoying town services, so that's more appropriate taxation. Some of the issues with that we've already heard about. We don't raise enough money, number one. Number two, utility taxes are never deductible. They're considered personal living expenses under the tax code, so it's not very tax efficient for our members. Parcel taxes might be deductible. The Tax Act of a year ago increased itemized deductions or that ceiling for many people, but there's an income phase out. Not sure how well that would help. And by the way, we have the vote threshold issue as well. That leads us back to real estate transfer tax. This unfairly distributes the burden. It focuses on people who, for whatever circumstance, have to be selling their house right now. And for some folks, that might feel deeply unfair because you spent 20 years saving and building equity in your house, and now it gets taken away because you have to sell it. On the other hand, and it might feel like an exit tax or something for hiring or leaving the community. But on the other hand, it is something that is tax deductible because it come out of the profit of your house, and therefore you would not pay income tax on that. You can argue that you can negotiate that between buyer and seller in terms of who pays it, but really the economic value of your house is the cap amount. So it really is coming out of monies that could otherwise go to you as the individual. So it really is a tax, and we have to acknowledge that. And I can certainly see how people whose business is in property in some way, shape, or form, either building homes or remodeling, buying them and then reselling them, or buying a home and living in it for a few years and then selling it and taking advantage of a tax deferral to get a better home or a bigger home or whatever, may object to that, as opposed to people who just buy a house and stay there for decades. So that's the issue. From what I've seen, I don't really see any alternative if we want to maintain our independence as a town, because it's the only mechanism really that could raise the money necessary. And again, getting back to taxation, people who know me and how often I complain about being overtaxed and have for decades, I find myself in the unbelievable to my family position of advocating for tax increase. But in defense here, this is about maintaining local control of a very special local community. And I point fingers elsewhere, you know, Sacramento, and then Sacramento driving costs down on counties. We drive them onto cities, you know, depriving us of BLF, mishandling the whole post George Floyd situation with defunding the police and refunding the police and hiring police and costs going up and ballooning and on and on. There's a lot of blame to go around. And so I do believe we're all overtaxed. The problem is that if we go out of business as a town, I don't see that changing. I just see our quality of life locally becoming far worse if we don't have a say in how we're governed here in terms of our own special little community that everyone in the Bay Area and beyond enjoy every weekend as we hiking and cycling and all the other things. So I just wanted to use that to sort of get my priors on the table before we talk about ranges or what to do. And with that, I'd love to hear from others.
I'd like to comment a little bit on some thoughts. I'm actually in favor of the real property transfer tax. And I'd like to comment on something that George, you've mentioned, and it's been said before that only a small number of people pay the property tax. That's true if what you're looking at is 365 days. But if you're looking over a long period of time, every citizen of the town will be paying. And even though I'm for this, personally, I would be much better off, since at my age, I'm much closer to selling my house than I am having to pay each year a smaller amount of money. But it's the right thing for the town because, first of all, the revenue will increase each year because the value of homes over a period of years, it'll increase because the value of property in the town goes up over the years. Having lived here for 9 years, I know that. That won't happen with a utility tax or a parcel tax. You'd have to run this whole election again to increase more money. Secondly, there's just like Tony has split this into ongoing costs and one-time costs. There's a one-time benefit, tax receipt revenue, which the town will get because there's a large development taking place by Stanford, which is unusual for this town to have that many new homes at one time. And Dave Cardinal and I did some work on this once before, and we thought it's close to $1 million that the town may get. It's probably a little less than that because these are ground rentals or ground leases as opposed to owning the ground that the homes sit on. Stanford will continue to own it. But in any case, it's close to $1 million that will bring in with the real property transfer tax. That matches Tony's $1 million of one-time cost. So there's a one-time cost that we need to catch up on things that we haven't been able to fund over the past few years. And there's a one-time benefit of revenue coming in with a real property transfer tax.
Just to clarify, are we sure that that would apply to those Stanford residences when residents change?
I was told that it is, yes.
Okay.
That was negotiated.
Okay, and for those online, Craig Taylor is telling us that, yes, that is confirmed. So that's great news.
Well, this
That's,
isn't just a property tax. It actually isn't a property tax. It's a
transfer
tax.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not somehow magically again.
Yeah, I was always suspicious that anything to, with, you know, not-for-profit Stanford would somehow not be taxed, but yeah, it's good to hear that that would be revenue that we would receive. Yeah. Right. But there you are buying your 100-year lease or whatever they're getting onto that plan.
So it would seem to me that in setting what's the objective of revenue we're trying to raise, that it's the 1.4 ongoing. And the 1.4 million actually is very close to what the sheriff's contract has increased over the last 8 years. I calculated to be 1.324 million. And so 1.4 sound, or 1.5, if you want to round it off, seems like the right target for us to be looking at. And a real property tax seems to me to be the best benefit for the town, not for Ken Levine.
Ken, would you happen to recall what rate would get us that amount of revenue?
I do. I actually have a presentation on that I had hoped to give at some point.
Oh, I'd like to hear it.
I can perhaps share it.
That would be good.
Maybe the council will invite you. They don't have much time. We'll have to figure this stuff out. So they might just invite you to present it.
I don't know what.
Yeah, can people stay beyond 6? You got to leave around 6. Well, I'll tell you what, if we can aim to leave a little after 6, we could come back on July 13th and have another meeting if people are available. Monday, July 13th, would that possibly work for people? Because this is a really important issue, right? And before we hit the deadline for the town council, I really want to hear this thoughtfully gone over at length.
Is the council going to have a meeting before then? You have two meetings, those 2 meetings scheduled to talk about all this stuff, correct?
Yeah, I think that's where we're asking Craig Taylor to come talk to us.
Just so the public can hear me, I apologize. So yeah, there's 2 meetings. Currently, we're looking at, on the meeting on the 8th, discussing the sort of the ordinance, like what the structure of the ordinance would be without actually the actual number if we go with the real estate property tax. But as Judith says, I mean, we still need to make all those decisions, but they're all coming up soon. I mean, this is not going to be a prolonged set of discussions. They're coming up quite quickly. So the first thing was going to be talking about the ordinance and the structure and whether, like right now, it's 55 cents per thousand. That's what's in state code. And the new ordinance will basically subsume that. So in a sense, it won't be like, let's just say we pick $10 per thousand. It really won't be an additional $10 per thousand. It'll be $9.45 in addition. And that's the way the ordinance will be written. And that was the direction from the council when we last met, was just to turn that into a single number and not 2 numbers added together.
This comment, it's actually $1.10, of which 55, half of that comes to us and half to the county.
Right, and the county's still going to get theirs. I mean, so the total, again, just to use an example, if it was $10, it will be $10.55, but it won't be $11.10. That's, so we're keeping ours. If whatever number is passed by the voters, that's the number that will come to the town, not that plus another number.
I just have a comment on the behalf of voters. It'd be really lovely if we didn't have to have a ballot thing in terms of cents per thousand. People have to go through 2 arithmetic calculations. If it could be a percent, that would be, I would love it. I think it'd just be easier for people. I've been reading all these things. I'm around this stuff all day and I hear 0.55 cents per thing. And I have to, I'm saying, what percent? You know what I mean? We don't want to do that to voters. So unless the law requires you to put a ballot measure in that format, I would strongly recommend make it easy for people to understand what we're doing with a percent. That's.
And what I can add is that is what's in the state code. So let us check with our attorney to see whether, but right now it's even worse than that. In the state code, it's 27.5 cents per 500. So, which is the 55 cents. So, but thank you for your comment.
But that might have to be in the official law, but the ballot measure is not the same as the law. So
I can check with our attorney. It's a good, this is the kind of conversation that'd be very helpful for the county.
Or you could just put it in parentheses.
Again,
percentage and
I
percentage.
don't want to get ahead of the council here since I'm just a council member, but this is the kind of commentary that's very helpful. Thank you.
So for the sake of planning, can we plan to be out of here at 6:10 to accommodate Mark and then perhaps come back on July 13th? Okay, we'll plan on that. Everyone can check their calendars. Let me know if it's a problem. And then we can hear from Ken perhaps on the ring. Well, will you have enough time? 30 minutes, 25 minutes? Yeah, I think this would be really good. And then we can chew on it some more, hear from our, neighbors and come back and talk more.
While we're waiting, I had one other item I didn't get a chance to mention. The council's aware of it because it was in one of my written things. I wanted them to at least at some point have a brief discussion about any exceptions that might be if a transfer tax is what they go with, or it's one of two or by itself. If there'd be any exceptions or exempt properties, it's allowable under the code. There's a lot of different possibilities. The one that jumped out at me right away is a marital settlement where the house isn't being transferred. One member is moving out or it's being transferred to someone else. That might qualify as a transfer and might be taxable. We may or may not want that.
Yeah, and
to happen.
inheritance comes to mind too.
Part and then people putting things into trusts and that kind of, there's a bunch of, legalistic transfers where no one's leaving really, or
Right.
selling that I think would keep people from voting for it if they knew they were in a situation.
So if I can just add, and then I'll let you.
Yeah,
get your-
please, Chris.
So the ordinance that we're looking at will include all the exceptions that are currently in the state code. So for the current real estate transfer tax, all those exemptions would be moved over to our ordinance. At least that's what's being proposed. So I don't know if it gets everyone that you're talking about, but if
But it has a bunch of.
but it has, there's quite a few of them. And it's definitely like the kind of transfers, between spouses and things like that. So I'm guessing it was going to cover.
That'll help.
It also covers the one where you transfer to a trust, which many people do.
Great, that's really helpful.
Okay, so let me just try and go through this fairly quickly.
Is your mic on?
Thank you. No, it is now.
Great, perfect.
So there are two issues here. One is the target revenues and the what tax rate dollars per 1,000 I'll use that you want to use. And the reason for that is that the revenue is equal to the tax rate times the value of the property transferred. So it's just pretty straightforward calculation. In setting that value of the property that will be transferred each year, that's the difficult.
Right next to the 60%.
Is this side right there?
It looks like I put a slide projector in. Yeah, that's it. Yep, perfect. Only you have to flip screen. It's, of course, it's giving you the wrong,
It's
how do I-
something more than we do with it.
Okay, how do I? Go to slide, pointer options, and show screen. So we're gonna switch program? No?
Use Nicholas Bragg as well.
Stop share and share.
No, it's,
Different Nick.
And then we go back to share.
We need to get back to the,
Yeah, I know we will. No,
before you do, we want to do that and then go back to this.
yeah, okay. All right, sorry, I just messed it up.
Just an application.
Yep. And. We're not. Not switching. Yeah, there is a way to switch this and I just don't remember how to do it.
I think it's probably fine.
Okay. We're trying to get the display bigger for you watching at home. Whatever works.
Just for the record, it looks fine to me.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, people at home, you can zoom in. Let's stop fiddling. We don't want to run out of time waiting for Ken to be able to tell us about all the work he did.
So the value of the property transferred each year is volatile. That's our issue here. The number of transactions are going to vary from year to year. The mix of the properties will vary from year to year. The mix between the very expensive ones and the less expensive ones. And so lastly, market prices tend to increase over time. So we have data that goes back 20 years from Paula Cone. Oh, well, that's interesting. I'm not sure then why. As we've gone through. So we're calculating what rate we need to use to achieve a certain revenue. The value of the properties transfer. What we're trying to determine is that we have data that goes back 20 some years from Paula Cone, and we just can't average it. Unless we're only averaging, unless the transactions were the same, the town was the same each year of those 20 years, which isn't true. So the value of the property transferred is the number of transactions will vary from year to year. The mix of the property will value, but market prices tend to increase over time due to inflation, asset appreciation, and improvements in the property. We have couple of sources of information, Paula Cone's data, and we have the historical 50% of the $1.10 collected by the county. So we also have that information. And so that's what we can base this on at the moment. So Tony had put together a staff report for the town council about a year ago, September of 25, and some of the work that this committee did back in August of 24, Michelle and I put out a report on the RPTT. And so we both used Paula Cone's historical data. We used it from this committee just for the period of time 2019 to 2023, whereas Tony had some more recent data up through 2024. So if we drop down to the middle of there, the basis of the data, we both had, the committee, we used 5-year averages for the number of transactions and for the average price. Tony was using in the staff report 15-year averages for both numbers, both the number of transactions and the average price. And so the proposed values that we came up with pretty much agreed on number of transactions, 56 and 53, but the average price was actually substantially different. So the tax rate to raise $2 million, just as a holding number, would be $8 per thousand based on the data that the committee had put together, And it would be $10 based on the data that Tony had come up with using this 15-year averages. So this slide shows the data that we have from actually collecting $1.10, which 55 cents came to us, came to the town. Unfortunately, area in green to the left of the screen shows the data that we have that Tony put together for a 5-year period. You can see that there was RPTT that was accounted for in the account. There was an accrual made, and which I'm not exactly sure why, but I think this goes back to counting entries. So it's been corrected. And so we get what's the total values on there on the right. And so the 5-year total was $890,000. And the 3-year total, if you just wanted to take the last 3 years, it was 420. So more importantly, the average were either 178,000 or 140,000. Again, a pretty big difference as to whether you're using 3-year data or 5-year data. And then given that there are different rates for $5, $6, $7, $8, or even $10 per 1,000, these are the amounts, the bottom right-hand side there, would be the amount of money revenue collected. So if we look at a 3-year average, it goes from at $5, 1.275 million to $2.5 million, 2.55 million at $10. So that was using the actual transfer tax revenues that the town was collecting. There are other possible approaches here. We could appreciate the historical prices by the average market rates. The real problem here is that the average market rates do increase over the years, and certainly over 20 years, it's a substantial amount of money. So we could postulate that that prices are going up 2% or 3% or 4%. I actually checked my own house value that I paid for it 49 years ago versus its value today, at least as claimed by online, Zillow or somebody. And it was more like 6%, which seemed rather high to me. But in any case, the second possible approach would be to get some data and determine the current value of all properties in Portola Valley. And we may have been able to get that from Zillow or Redfin. We haven't done that. And I don't think we have time to do it now anyhow. So here I said we can update current prices by appreciating historical prices. This is my approach to that. This, when used on a Excel spreadsheet, allows the data on the left is what Paula Cohn has given us for all the years, including the ones that Tony has covered. So it goes through 2024. And these were the average prices of the homes that were sold in that year. That were transferred in that year. And then I assume either a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6% annual rate of increase. And if you do, let's just use the 6% number for a moment. There's a factor to increase the price, and it works out so that if you then increase the price at 6%, on the right-hand side, it tells us at the bottom right what the tax revenue would be at a I misspoke. I'm calculating in the middle just a factor, and the factor is then given the average price on the right-hand side of the screen. And so the conclusion here is that the current, if we take whether it's a 5 or a 21-year average, we're getting somewhere in the $5 million plus range of average prices for most any annual price increase, whether it's 2% or 6%. And so that's substantially higher than what Michelle and I had come up with by just averaging a few years of Paula Cohn's data. And it's substantially more than the staff report that was produced about a year ago. So I think that this doesn't tell us, it's easy to calculate once you get the average price, what the, and the number of transactions we tend to agree on. It's easy to calculate what the rate then should be once you know what the desired revenues are.
Yeah, just the back of the envelope here for everyone to think about while you were chatting. If we take a conservative estimate of 50 sales per year, we were looking at 53 and 56 as averages, and an average price of $5 million a year, which is still lower by like than what we're now. If you want to raise $1.5 million a year, that gives you a $6 per thousand or 0.6% tax rate on sales. And so when you're thinking of a range, you know, you're $4 to $6 to $7 or $8 a thousand, depending on your assumptions, certainly seems to handle the problem.
Right, and you compare that 0.6% to what you pay your brokers.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, factor of 10.
More slides, or do we have a couple minutes to chat
I
about?
think that's the last slide. right
Okay.
there.
Thanks very much, Ken. And we can chat for about 5, 6, 7 minutes, and then we want to make certain to wrap
And
up.
that, sorry, that 10% should be 1%, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It
That's
is.
10
It is.
per
It is
1,000.
confusing.
10 per thousand.
So once again, let me just walk through the back of the envelope while everyone's thinking of what we're talking about with reasonable assumptions that I think are conservative based on the data we just saw. $5 million average sale price, 50 transactions per year. You want to close a $1.5 million gap, which is the 1.4 ongoing with a bit extra, but with appreciation, we should be able to keep up with inflation. The town council may decide, no, that's not enough. You need to raise more. Okay, readjust the numbers. That would imply a $6 per thousand, or in human speak, 0.6% fee or tax rate that you would pay as part of your transaction expenses of however many percent to your brokers. And that would close the gap. And by fiddling with these assumptions, right, you know, the whole arithmetic is pretty simple. Reasonable people can disagree, but that kind of gets us the shape of what the town council is dealing with and what would keep us viable long term.
Ken, my own perspective is thank you very much for pulling that data. I see that the key takeaway is really one around how to think about the future state as opposed to simply relying upon historical data. And one of the conclusions that at least I took away is that instead of kind of thinking about a 1%, and I agree with Bill that it's way easier to think in percentages than it is in per value. But so I tend to think about it as on a percentage basis, that there is a possibility to still achieve what at least has been talked about in terms of filling in a budget gap at something at less than 1% of transfer price, if you will, or the tax there. You know, my own perspective, and by the way, and I will not be able to be here at the next meeting in July, but I just, and I don't want to kind of drum or hit this drum too often, but you know, I do believe in timely audits. That is one of the hallmarks of financial discipline and financial responsibility. I believe in balanced budgets. Similarly, that's a keystone. Third, I would just kind of caution all of us to look at the most recent example of this adventure in St. Helena, where it was voted down. It was close, but it was voted down. And specifically, because I do have a client and friend who lives there and who was involved in this. And it was pretty simple. He said Ken, you pointed this out, is that it's hard for people to get, it's not just a one-time, 1-year decision, even if you are unlikely to sell your house in that year. In your experience here in Portola Valley, it is highly likely that you or your family will experience this type of transfer. And there's just a very straightforward, reasonable understanding that, hey, I want me and my family to get as much out of this transaction as possible because it is a form of an exit tax, and maybe, and therefore that's just a consideration. And I know that was as I understand it, that was the reason why the St. Helena endeavor did not pass. That said, all of that, I believe fundamentally and wholeheartedly in democracy. So this is something that, even though we've gone through this process of whether it needs to be supermajority because of Prop 13 or say Prop 13, but no, there's been a court decision and now some type of other new ballot where if it actually then gets codified in the Constitution is no, that then at least what the town council would be presenting to the voters. And if it is legitimately at a simple majority as opposed to supermajority, then let's let the voters speak in November. And then in terms of the percentage, what it would be, I do agree with that fundamental thesis that the lower percentage has the higher chance of passing. So that would be it from my perspective. But thank you, Ken, for putting that presentation together and the data that you collected.
Yeah, thanks for me as well. I thought that was very helpful. Does anybody know if when we did the polling or the market check, for lack of a better word, on the transfer tax, what the rate assumed was? Did we assume a rate? Yeah.
Yeah, Craig's going to tell us.
So we pulled two rates, $10 rate and an $8 rate. And ironically, the $10 rate did slightly better than the $8 rate, but it was so small that, so generally, I mean, Mark, I agree with you. That's sort of the intuitive versus, but technically in the poll, the $10 did slightly better.
And do you know how many people were polled or actually responded to the poll?
It was considered, statistically significant by a professional pollster. But Judith, do you remember the polling?
I think it was 220.
That's what I was going to say. It was on order 200 plus.
Okay.
So, and it came in roughly at 60%.
61.
61, but wasn't the other one like 60
You want to know the standard deviation on that?
Yeah, but I think the other was like 60.8 versus 61 or something. But anyway, those are roughly the numbers.
Okay. Yeah, and I too echo that. Certainly partly because I think if people are thinking rationally, the lower rate should poll or result in a higher percentage of votes for one point. But second, I would propose or hope that we go out at a rate that is enough and no more than what's necessary for obvious reasons. And my last point is I am concerned that this may not pass. Despite how it may have polled. And I just hope that we give some thought as a community to what that looks like if and when that happens. I'm sure we have, but besides cutting expenses dramatically, what other options do we have?
One other point, I was like the rest of you, I was not polled last fall because we're associated with town committees, but I talked to a neighbor of mine, and I also looked at the materials that the consultant had shown at one of the council meetings. And I don't know a lot about polling, but one of the other sort of unknowns for us on this, they can 61.7% were in favor with a certain standard deviation. It's also very important, of course, how the question is put to them. And they constructed what could be ballot language, the way it might actually, not the way it will, but the way it could be on the ballot. And it usually talks about shall, blah, 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 it's got the percentages in there, or the dollars per thousand or whatever. But it also, and this is very important, I think, for voters, they want to know what it's going to be spent on. What is it going to? The way it was asked, and it's probably the way it would show up on a ballot measure, said to be used for, police and safety, and for fire and fuel reduction, which we all know in town are the two things people care most about, and a couple other things. At the bottom, it has the required language and general purposes. This is not a special tax. It can be used for anything. So the way the question was posed for the sample was, if I was just reading it, say, oh, okay, I'm in favor of, fire reduction and having police protection and so forth. But there's no requirement to be spent that way. In fact, it goes to the general fund. In fact, we all know that we're always going to and always have prioritized public safety and fire protection as the two things we're not going to sacrifice. And if we have to downsize or tighten our belt, we're going to do it with staffing or consultants or development/education, or pulling more money out of the reserves. Now, if you go into a ballot measure, telling people that, your odds of getting 50+1 probably drop, right? Because people want to pay for protection and fire. So we've got this issue of the money is being raised. It's not going to be used for those things. We're going to keep spending on those things. It's going to be used for something else. The ballot measure will legally meet the requirement, but it's not going to be written. We're not going to write it, I'm sure, to talk about what it's actually going to end up going for. So I'm kind of struggling in terms of being transparent to the community and so forth. And I'm thinking, when you're going out to the public and you're talking, this question is going to come up. They said, what are you going to do with the money? And then you're going to tell them the truth. And they're going to say, why am I voting for something that's not going to increase fire protection? Or what? I mean, we're not going to go and give the sheriff more than they asked for just because.
Well, no, but
we passed a ballot
money's fungible, and if we don't have enough and we go bust, we can't.
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah. But so the real question is, what is the incremental money going to be spent on? So we have to kind of think carefully about how that's portrayed and what we say leading up to the election, and what, the ballot argument will probably be signed by people in town that have strong opinions about this.
We're hearing from Craig again.
I would add that we have reduced our fire reduction. So we have made those reductions. And we've looked at if other ways to reduce the sheriff's contract. So we just haven't found one with the sheriff, because it's, we've got sort of one, in theory, full time.
My only comment is I would go for a higher amount, even though it's a higher tax rate. And a few years ago, when we had a lot of money in our reserve, we actually voted to reduce the UUT. And I don't think we should vote for that this election, because it'd be too confusing. But if we go with a higher rate and we raise more money than we need, in 2 years, I would possibly put on the ballot to reduce the UUT at the discretion of the council, like we did a few years ago. And to reinforce, since I'm a tax person, the tax would reduce the gain on the sale, which, it could be 30–40%. So it's not real dollars. The UUT is not tax deductible. So if you've been paying that for 20–30 years, that adds up to a lot of money. So anyway, that's my quick comment here as we sign off.
Okay.
Right. I'm sorry, the council can?
And we're
Really? Because
Mr. Taylor's pointing out
a
the
few
council
years-
can reduce the
a few years ago, I think we voted to reduce it, though. It was on the ballot, as I recall.
Maybe after some more complicated.
Yeah,
Okay,
and-
all right.
And just before we adjourn, Karen Vatry, you've had your hand up for a very long time. Please, very quickly, if you can say what you would.
Yes, I'm always quick. My initial comment was going to be about, on Tony's slide, there was not enough future projects. And I think, what the community wants to see is things like, widening the Alpine Road for fire evacuation, really doing a lot more of the, emergency route clearance. We're doing some of it, but I think it's 10 years before would be done at the old rate. So there are additional safety measures that are important. And I think that if they're on the list, that would motivate people. And the other comment I wanted to make was about the Los Angeles ones at 4%. And it starts at 5 million and 5.3%. So it's a significantly larger amount that we're talking about. And I think that's a relevant thing to think about for the voters. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really important, the idea about what to do in an evacuation as a long-term plan. And with that, we'll continue this on the 13th. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.